Reading from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila Chapter 1, titled The Spiritual Masters. Today we're reading text 57. Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Text 57. Cintāmaṇir jayati somagirir gurur me cintāmaṇir jayati somagirir gurur me cintāmaṇir jayati somagirir gurur me śikṣā-guruś cha bhagavān śikhi-piñcha-mauliḥ śikṣā-guruś cha bhagavān śikhi-piñcha-mauliḥ śikṣā-guruś cha bhagavān śikhi-piñcha-mauliḥ yat-pāda-kalpataru-pallava-śekhareṣu 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 līlā-svayaṁvara-rasaṁ labhate jaya-śrīḥ līlā-svayaṁvara-rasaṁ labhate jaya-śrīḥ līlā-svayam-vara-rasaṁ labhate jaya-śrīḥ cintāmaṇir jayati somagirir gurur me śikṣā-guruś cha bhagavān śikhi-piñcha-mauliḥ yat-pāda-kalpataru-pallava-śekhareṣu līlā-svayaṁvara-rasaṁ labhate jaya-śrīḥ cintāmaṇir jayati somagirir gurur me śikṣā-guruś cha bhagavān śikhi-piñcha-mauliḥ yat-pāda-kalpataru-pallava-śekhareṣu līlā-svayaṁvara-rasaṁ labhate jaya-śrīḥ cintāmaṇir jayati somagirir gurur me śikṣā-guruś bhagavān śikhi-piñcha-mauliḥ yat-pāda-kalpataru-pallava-śekhareṣu līlā-svayaṁvara-rasaṁ labhate jaya-śrīḥ cintāmaṇir jayati somagirir gurur me śikṣā-guruś bhagavān śikhi-piñcha-mauliḥ yat-pāda-kalpataru-pallava-śekhareṣu līlā-svayam-vara-rasaṁ labhate jaya-śrīḥ cintāmaṇir jayati somagirir gurur me śikṣā-guruś bhagavān śikhi-piñcha-mauliḥ yat-pāda-kalpataru-pallava-śekhareṣu līlā-svayam-vara-rasaṁ labhate jaya-śrīḥ. Any ladies? cintāmaṇir jayati somagirir gurur me śikṣā-guruś bhagavān śikhi-piñcha-mauliḥ yat-pāda-kalpataru-pallava-śekhareṣu līlā-svayam-vara-rasaṁ labhate jaya-śrīḥ cintāmaṇir jayati somagirir gurur me śikṣā-guruś bhagavān śikhi-piñcha-mauliḥ yat-pāda-kalpataru-pallava-śekhareṣu līlā-svayaṁvara-rasaṁ labhate jaya-śrīḥ cintāmaṇi jayati. All glory to Cintāmaṇi. Somagiri, the initiating guru. Guruhu, spiritual master. My śikṣā-guruḥ, instructing spiritual master. Cha, and bhagavān, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Śikhi-piñcha, with peacock feathers. Mauliḥ, whose head. Yat, whose. Pada, of the lotus feet. Kalpa-taru, like desire trees. Pallava, like new leaves. Śekhareṣu, at the toenails. Līlā-svayaṁvara, of conjugal pastimes. Rasaṁ, the mellow. Labhate, obtains. Jaya-śrīḥ, Śrīmatī Rādhārāṇī. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. All glories to Cintāmaṇi and my initiating spiritual master, Somagiri. All glories to my instructing spiritual master, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who wears peacock feathers in his crown. Under the shade of his lotus feet, which are like desire trees, jaya-śrīḥ, Rādhārāṇī, enjoys the transcendental mellows of an eternal consort. Purport. This verse is from the Krishna Karnamrita, which was written by a great Vaishnav sannyasi named Bilvamangal Thakur, who is also known as Lila Shuka. He intensely desired to enter into the eternal pastimes of the Lord, and he lived at Vrindavan for 700 years in the vicinity of Brahmakund, a still existing bathing tank in Vrindavan. The history of Bilvamangal Thakur is given in a book called Sri Vallabha Digvijay. He appeared in the 8th century of the Shak era in the province of Dravida and was the chief disciple of Vishnu Swami. In a list of temples and monasteries kept in Shankaracharya's monastery in Dwarka, Bilvamangal is mentioned as the founder of the Dwarkadish temple there. He entrusted the service of his deity to Hari Brahmachari, a disciple of Vallabhabhata. Bilvamangal Thakur actually entered into the transcendental pastimes of Lord Krishna. He has recorded his transcendental experiences and appreciation in the book known as Krishna Karnamrita. In the beginning of that book, he has offered his obeisances to his different gurus, and it is to be noted that he has adored them all equally. The first spiritual master mentioned is Cintāmaṇi, who was one of his instructing spiritual masters because she first showed him the spiritual path. Cintāmaṇi was a prostitute with whom Bilvamangal was intimate earlier in his life. She gave him the inspiration to begin on the path of devotional service, and because she convinced him to give up material existence to try for perfection by loving Krishna, he has first offered his respects to her. Next, he offers his respects to his initiating spiritual master, Somagiri, and then to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who was also his instructing spiritual master. He explicitly mentions Bhagavān, who has peacock feathers on his crown, because the Lord of Vrindavan, Krishna the cowherd boy, used to come to Bilvamangal to talk with him and supply him with milk. In his adoration of Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, he states that Jaya-śrīḥ, the goddess of fortune, Śrīmatī Rādhārāṇī, takes shelter in the shade of his lotus feet to enjoy the transcendental ras of nuptial love. The complete treatise, Krishna Karnamrita, is dedicated to the transcendental pastimes of Sri Krishna and Śrīmatī Rādhārāṇī. It is a book to be read and understood by the most elevated devotees of Sri Krishna. Om Jnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshulam Militam Yenam Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapatantikam Vandeham Sri-Guru Sri-Yuta-pada-kamalam Sri-Gurun Vaishnavamscha Sri-Rupam Sagrajatan Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa-tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya-śrīḥ Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So again, the translation: all glories to Cintāmaṇi and my initiating spiritual master, Somagiri. All glories to my instructing spiritual master, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who wears peacock feathers in his crown. Under the shade of his lotus feet, which are like desire trees, Jaya-śrīḥ, Rādhārāṇī, enjoys the transcendental mellow of an eternal consort. So I'm humbly praying to all the Vaishnavas. I have no power, I have no qualification to speak. It's a very high topic. I'm begging for all of your blessing. So this first chapter of Chaitanya Charitamrita is titled The Spiritual Masters. And Srila Prabhupada gives a summary. He says, the first chapter of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita begins with 14 Sanskrit verses that describe the absolute truth. Then the next 3 Sanskrit verses describe the principal deities of Vrindavan, namely Sri Radha Madan Mohan, Sri Radha Govindadev, and Sri Radha Gopinath Ji. The first of the 14 verses is a symbolic representation of the absolute truth. And the entire first chapter is in actuality devoted to this single verse, which describes Lord Chaitanya in his 6 different transcendental expansions. So the entire first chapter of Krishnadas Kaviraj's Chaitanya Charitamrita is an expansion of his first verse. And what is that first verse? Vande Gurun Isha Bhaktan Isham Isha Vatarankan Tat Prakashams Chat Chakti Krishna Chaitanya Samgyakam. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the spiritual masters, the devotees of the Lord's incarnations, his plenary portions, his energies, and the primeval Lord himself, Sri Krishna Chaitanya. So this verse is describing Lord Chaitanya in his 6 different transcendental expansions. And we're hearing something about Guru Tattva. We're hearing about the spiritual masters of Krishnadas Kaviraj, the author. He has said, Srila Nityananda Ram is the plenary manifestation of the Lord, and I have been initiated by him. I therefore offer my respectful obeisances unto his lotus feet. So, maybe there is there is God and there is Guru. And in the case of Krishnadas Kaviraj, he has taken initiation from Nityananda Prabhu, who is a plenary manifestation of the Lord. And he's describing in this section how the Lord may personally come to act as spiritual master for the devotee. And he's given several examples of this. I'm just coming to why are we hearing this verse? Why is he quoting this verse from Bilvamangal Thakur? He has quoted this verse from Krishna Karnamrita, where Bilvamangal Thakur has glorified his spiritual masters. He's offered obeisances, his respect to his spiritual masters. And in this context, what will be very significant is that the Lord himself is one of the gurus of Bilvamangal Thakur. So we'll just try to build a little context to this verse. Krishnas Kaviraj writes, "Although I know that my spiritual master is a servitor of Sri Chaitanya, I know him also as a plenary manifestation of the Lord." Prabhupada writes, "Lord Nityananda, who is Balaram himself, the first direct manifestation or expansion of Krishna, is the original spiritual master. He helps Lord Krishna in his pastimes, and he is a servant of the Lord. Every living entity is eternally a servant of Sri Krishna Chaitanya. Therefore, the spiritual master cannot be other than a servant of Lord Chaitanya. The spiritual master's eternal occupation is to expand the service of the Lord by training disciples in a service attitude. A spiritual master never poses as the Supreme Lord himself. He is considered a representative of the Lord. The revealed scriptures prohibit one's pretending to be God, but a bona fide spiritual master is a most faithful and confidential servant of the Lord, and therefore deserves as much respect as Krishna." Right, so what is that verse? Shakshadharitvena samasta shastrir uktastata tavyateva sadviv kintu prabhurya priyaiva tasya bande guru sri charanadabindam. So there, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is glorifying the Lord, the spiritual master, as the representative of the Lord, because he is the dearmost servitor of the Lord. And so the same point is here. Lord Nityananda is the first direct manifestation or expansion of Krishna and the original spiritual master. And he is helping Lord Krishna in his pastimes. And so the spiritual master should be the representative of Lord Chaitanya or the representative of Lord Nityananda, who is expanding the pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. One should know the instructing spiritual master to be the personality of Krishna. Lord Krishna manifests himself as the super soul and as the greatest devotee of the Lord. Srila Krishnas Kaviraj Goswami states that the instructing spiritual master is a bona fide representative of Sri Krishna. Sri Krishna himself teaches us as the instructing spiritual master from within and without. From within, he teaches as Paramatma, our constant companion, and from without, he teaches from the Bhagavad Gita as the instructing spiritual master. So Arjuna also, he has accepted Krishna as his spiritual master, who is directly the Lord himself. And by extension, we also can take instruction directly from Krishna by hearing the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna's Kaviraj, he cites the Bhagavad Gita here also. Let me find that. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yenamam upayanti te. To those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. So, by our progress in Krishna consciousness, Krishna himself gives instructions to the devotee. This verse of Bhagavad Gita clearly states how Govindadev instructs his bona fide devotee. The Lord declares that by enlightenment and theistic knowledge, he awards attachment for him to those who constantly engage in his transcendental loving service. This awakening of divine consciousness enthralls a devotee who thus relishes his eternal mellow. Such an awakening is awarded only to those convinced by devotional service about the transcendental nature of the personality of Godhead. They know that the supreme truth, the all-spiritual and all-powerful person, is one without a second and has fully transcendental senses. He is the fountainhead of all emanations. Such pure devotees, always merged in knowledge of Krishna and absorbed in Krishna consciousness, exchange thoughts and realizations as great scientists exchange their views and discuss the results of their research in scientific academies. Such exchanges of thought in regard to Krishna give pleasure to the Lord, who therefore favors such devotees with all enlightenment. So on the higher level, that type of realization is not an ordinary thing, but a great blessing from the Lord. And you can say that a text like Krishna Karnamrita by the Bilvamangal Thakur is the very high realizations of a spiritual scientist who is, just like the scientists in the academies will exchange to discuss their research. So Bilvamangal Thakur, he has shared the results of his research into Krishna consciousness. Krishna's Kaviraj, he then cites a section from Srimad-Bhagavatam of Lord Krishna instructing Brahma. So again, it is an instance of a person taking shelter of the spiritual master, and that spiritual master is the Lord himself. And then this verse that we read today, again in this context, what's very significant is that Bilvamangal Thakur was personally instructed by Krishna. And he has said, śikhi-piñcha-mauliḥ, with peacock feathers on his head. So Bilvamangal Thakur was such a great exalted personality that he was personally instructed by the Lord. A small, beautiful Brajbasi boy was personally attending to him and bringing him prasadam. Srila Prabhupada said, was giving him milk, was seeing to it that he had milk. The story of Bilvamangal Thakur is, like it was said here, the first guru that he glorifies is Cintāmaṇi. The verse started, what was that? Cintāmaṇir jayati, all glory to Cintāmaṇi. So who is Cintāmaṇi? Something like in the story of Ajamil, Bilvamangal Thakur was from a South Indian Brahmin family, but somehow by bad association he became attached to a prostitute. And the story is he was so attached to meeting her that right after the Pinda ceremony of his father, which is maybe like a somber, sacred thing to attend. One should not be so frivolous after such a thing. There was a horrible storm, and Bilvamangal Thakur was, passing through an over-flooded river and even pushing aside the corpses of dead bodies. And at one point he had to scale a wall, and there was a snake on that wall which he mistook as a rope, and he climbed the snake. In other words, he took unbelievable trouble to meet with Cintāmaṇi. And Cintāmaṇi, seems like she was a nice devotee, and she instructed him, saying, if you had just some of this attachment, you're attached to this body, which is just a bag of bones and skin. And if you had just a fraction of this attachment that you have to my material body, if you had that kind of attachment to the Lord, you could be a great devotee. And she said, you should go to Vrindavan and transfer your attachment to Govinda. And in that way, you can achieve real happiness, more than you'll ever get trying to enjoy sense gratification with me. And so, somehow, when coming from her at that time, that comment strongly resonated with Bilvamangal Thakur. And he decided to take that advice. And he went to Vrindavan. And another story is there that somehow in his travels he stopped at the house of a Brahmin family, and in that family was an attractive young daughter, and he somehow he looked at her in a mood of material enjoyment. And when the Brahmin family, they gave great respect to him and asked how they could serve him. And so he asked for the hairpin of that girl, and he gauged out his own eyes, which was an astonishing expression of his determination in the path of Krishna consciousness. That if these eyes are going to take me away from my desired goal in life, then better I poke them out, better I not have these eyes. So Bilvamangal Thakur was a blind person. That's the point I wanted to come to. He's living in Vrindavan as a sadhu. Srila Prabhupada said he was living for 700 years. That's what it said in the purport. We know that some very exalted personalities may have very long lives. Even we heard not long ago, there was somehow a great mystic yogi who had great regard for Srila Prabhupada, who was living for like 400 years, and he passed away maybe in the 70s or the 80s. And maybe even Srila Prabhupada mentioned how he was the guru of more than one generation because he was surviving for all those 100 years. So Bilvamangal Thakur, Srila Prabhupada said, he had come from the 8th century of the Shaka era. My understanding is that means around 800 AD, and living for 700 years. And he entrusted his deity to Hari Brahmachari, a disciple of Vallabhabhata. So please correct me if I've misunderstood, but Vallabhabhata is a contemporary of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He's in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So his disciple, that's something like 700 years later. So the point is that Krishna personally came to Bilvamangal Thakur. He became so advanced in Krishna consciousness. Tesham satatayuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam. Or yata, what is it? Anyway, as we surrender unto the Lord, He reciprocates with us. Ye yatam mam prapadyante tam stajaiva vajamyaham. Yes, so it's like a very hopeful, inspiring story that at the beginning of Bilvamangal Thakur's story, he was struggling in his attachments to sense gratification. even to the point of being, quite degraded by a prostitute. But he came to the point where he was so advanced in Krishna consciousness that Lord Krishna personally was coming to him in Vrindavan, a blind old sadhu, supplying him milk. There's a famous painting of Bilvamangal Thakur. He's sitting on the ground. It looks like he has a tanpura. And so you can understand he's singing devotional songs, and Krishna is sitting there hearing. In Vrindavan, Sri Krishna would personally give Bilvamangal prasadam and lead him to a safe resting place, because as a blind person, he may need more help. At first, Līlā-shuka, that is the initiated name, Līlā-shuka didn't know the identity of this sweet Brajbasi boy. Then, one day, Bihari Lal played his captivating flute for the blind man. Suddenly, Bilvamangal became mad with desire to behold the beautiful, sweet form of Shyamasundar. Realizing that this Brajbasi boy was actually the Lord of his life and the love of his heart, he reached out to touch Krishna. Playful Gopal touched Bilvamangal's hand, laughed lovingly, and ran away. Singing, Bilvamangal said, "You can run away from my hand, but you can never leave my heart." So, very charming and beautiful, and shows the incredible blessings received by this great personality. And his book, Krishna Karnamrita, is among the very high confidential literature of the Gaudiya Vaishnav canon. Like Srila Prabhupada, he says, it is a book to be read and understood by the most elevated devotees of Sri Krishna, this Krishna Karnamrita. So we understand that some transcendental literature is meant to be published and distributed en masse. Like we will distribute Bhagavad Gita and so many corollary books, maybe the first 2 cantos of Srimad-Bhagavatam. These books can be widely distributed because they are fit for anyone. And when, the devotees will distribute many Bhagavad Gitas, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, it's gives great pleasure, very wonderful. But there are stages in Krishna consciousness, from Shraddha to Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana Kriya, Anarthana Vritti, Nishta, Ruchi, Asakti, Bhava, Prema. And according to how we've surrendered ourselves, according to our detachment from material sense gratification, and our attachment to the service of Guru and Krishna, we will have different levels of qualification. And there may be and so there's literature that is appropriate for different stages of devotional life. Just like, you enter the kindergarten class, and you enter the elementary school classes, and the middle school classes, and the high school classes, and the college classes, and the graduate classes, and the postgraduate classes. So they will have a different curriculum. And sometimes as devotees we may think that this literature is the highest, and so we want to go directly there. But it is something like if a grade school student or if a high school student, he tries to learn from the postgraduate class, then what will the result be? It will not be very good. So maybe if there are any comments or questions, we'll leave it there for now. There's more to say about that, but maybe we can just take any questions or comments. Nothing? I came across this amazing purport in my own reading of Bhagavatam yesterday, directly on this point, which is why I thought to make it. It's quite a long comment. Srila Prabhupada is talking about qualification for progressing through the Srimad-Bhagavatam. The Srimad-Bhagavatam can be compared to the body of the Lord, and the first cantos, the first and the second canto, can be compared to the Lord's lotus feet. And basically he says, so long as we will have a taste for material sense gratification, then it is best to focus on the lotus feet of the Lord, as that will give us the purity required to really be able to benefit from the higher cantos. Prabhupada writes, purification means getting free gradually from sex desire, and this is attained by meditation on the person of the Lord as described herein, beginning from the feet. One should not try to go upwards artificially without seeing for himself how much he has been released from the sex desire. So no one has to tell you, you can understand by yourself. How free are you from that desire? The smiling face of the Lord is the 10th canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, and there are many upstarts who at once try to begin with the 10th canto, and especially with the 5 chapters which delineate the Ras Lila of the Lord. This is certainly improper. By such improper study or hearing of Bhagavatam, the material opportunists have played havoc by indulgence in sex life in the name of Bhagavatam. This vilification of Bhagavatam is rendered by the acts of the so-called devotees. One should be free from all kinds of sex desire before he tries to make a show of recital of Bhagavatam. Sometimes we see advertisements for people doing recitation of Bhagavatam, but Prabhupada is saying if the speaker is not sufficiently pure, then it will just be like a show. It may be a good show. We've seen such shows. Sometimes they can be entertaining, but what is their spiritual value? Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur clearly defines the import of purification as cessation from sex indulgence. As soon as one gets free from the intoxication of sex indulgence by purification of intelligence, one should step forward for the next meditation, or in other words, the progress of meditation on the different limbs of the transcendental body of the Lord should be enhanced in proportion to the progress of purification of the heart. The conclusion is that those who are still entrapped by sex indulgence should never progress to meditation above the feet of the Lord. Therefore, recital of Srimad-Bhagavatam by them should be restricted to the first and second cantos of the great literature. One must complete the purificatory process by assimilating the contents of the first 9 cantos. Then one should be admitted into the realm of the 10th canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam. So we've seen, actually when I was in university, I was in New York, and I took some classes like in Hinduism, and my GBC, who is a sannyasi preacher, he said, see if you can get me to speak in those classes. And so I spoke to the professor, and he agreed, and he let Maharaj speak in 2 of his classes. And when they came to the Sanskrit class, Maharaj was asking those students who were ordinary people, who had no faith in Krishna, no faith in God, they had no preliminary qualification, and undoubtedly were not following regulative principles. And he asked them if they had heard the Srimad-Bhagavatam and if they had read any of it. And they said, oh yes, we have read portions of the Srimad-Bhagavatam in our Sanskrit studies. Oh, what is that? Yes, we have read the 5 chapters of the Ras Lila. And so that can be the mentality. And so definitely that is the goal. But our acharyas want us to systematically progress on the path of purification so that we can approach those exalted subject matters in the right way. So again, the story of Bilvamangal Thakur is very wonderful and inspiring because it shows someone who is fallen and compromised in his devotional service, but by his incredible determination, he took shelter of the Lord and was blessed with so much incredible mercy of the Lord, personally meeting the Lord, and personally competent to compose a very, very high-class, confidential spiritual literature, Krishna Karnamrita, which was relished by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates. It was written here in the purport that he is glorifying jayaśrīḥ, Śrīmatī Rādhārāṇī, as being at the lotus feet of the Lord. And it's understood that Bilvamangal Thakur was amongst the first great saints to reveal something of the glory of Śrīmatī Rādhārāṇī. In Srimad-Bhagavatam, Radharani is not directly mentioned. She's indirectly mentioned, but that confidential subject matter is more kept a secret. But great saints, great devotees, including Bilvamangal Thakur, over time have revealed more, and that is from their realization, like the scientists revealing something of their research. Anyway, maybe we'll leave it there, unless there's any comment or question at this time. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.